I'd like to, first of all, just say a few words on the cooperation that happened in our select committee. I do actually think, and we've voiced some of our real opposition to this bill, but I do think that in the select committee itself there was some reasoned, some good conversation and some good discussion around some of the issues. But ultimately, they went to the minister and were turned down. And I think that's very sad. And I'm pleased that she's in the House, because I'm going to come in a minute to the limited attendance centres, which I think are an appalling piece, or appalling part of this legislation. This legislation is a bit of a mixed bag. It's the good, there's the bad, and there's the downright ugly here. There is a part, and I'll go through a couple of parts I think are reasonably good here, and people have already spoken about this. Louise Upston talked about it, as well as the secondary, tertiary, that interface that's built addresses. I'm not 100% sure that this needed to be legislated in the way that it did, but nevertheless, it does provide some opportunities for those kids, particularly as they get on in a secondary school, and helps them transition into tertiary education in a way that I think will ensure and help some of those children stay at school longer, continue on to do to more and better skills, and therefore move into tertiary education. And we do need in New Zealand, more than anything else perhaps, a well-trained and well-educated young people coming into our workforce to upskill our workforce, and this will help in that regard. And I acknowledge Colin King's mention of Stuart Middleton, who was a former teacher of mine actually when I was in the 7th form, who was still going strong with passion and zeal in doing this at Manukau Institute of Technology. What it'll enable the Minister to do is to approve a board of trustees, a registered private school, a tertiary institution or an industry training organisation as a lead provider of a secondary tertiary program. And then they can enter into a partnership or an agreement, and the agreement and the partnership is specified in the legislation, and it will help particularly those 11 to 13-year-old students to continue on. I think there's some other parts of this legislation which is useful, but it's basically housekeeping, which is tightening up on some of the international education parts, things that were introduced. The growth in the international education sector happened largely under the Labor government. It's now a $2 billion industry. It needs to be well legislated. It needs to ensure that, as this part of the legislation does, that there's not the waka jumping between various institutions, and tries and maintains standards and stability in our international educational arena. And so I think that, Mr. Speaker, is actually a good piece or a useful piece of tightening up of the legislation that needed to happen. We've spoken, and others have spoken, about the hereditary entitlements to attend schools. I'm of the opinion that schools should be of an excellent quality no matter where they are, and if you introduce an element of competition, all that happens is the school that is the most favoured, the best school of today, gets bigger and bigger at the expense of the school down the road. And as Mr. Peachy knows, that can reverse and turn around with the change in economic status of a particular area, and immediately people start flowing out of that school to another school, which then gets bigger and bigger, and the school, their first school, is left with empty classrooms. It is inefficient in a state education system, and what we have at the moment actually works. But while I don't necessarily agree with the provisions in this bill, it's not necessarily something that would cause us to oppose this legislation. What causes us to oppose this legislation more than anything else is quite simply the limited care facilities that has been brought in here. And I want to also refer to two of the best submissions I think we had in the Select Committee on this particular subject. Sue Moroney's mentioned some of this in terms of the Human Rights Commission, that says mentions, of course, that the bill proposes to amend Section 310, Part 2, so that the limited attendance centres would no longer be regulated as early childhood education centres. Now, we don't have any problems about the education element of this, but we do have a problem is the safety and the care of children. That's where we have the problem. And listen, this is what the Human Rights Commission actually said. The Commission understands there is doubt as to whether staff in the limited attendance centres would be required to undergo a police vetting check. We welcome the Minister's reassurance during the bill's first reading that it was not the bill's intention to remove the vetting, and we strongly recommend that such checks remain mandatory. That didn't happen. The Commission was making this, warning us. We had solid evidence from submitters, both the Human Rights Commission and NZEI, who said more or less the same thing, that this is a cause for worry. Now, Louise Upston mentions that she's actually okay about that because she goes to the gym and her gym has a glass panel. There's no requirement in the legislation to be visible from the gym. There's lots of gyms and lots of shopping centres that don't have that facility. They're not required. The person there isn't required to have a police check. Wouldn't that be the first thing that you would want to do if you had someone looking after your children, is that you would like to know that they're actually not a child abuser? I'd like to know that. I'd like to think that I could go along and leave my children at a gym and not have to ask about that. I don't really need to. I would like to think that I don't have to go in and ask the person in the gym, is this person being vetted? Order. Is this person being vetted? Is that person over there that's looking after my child, is that person okay to look after my child? Let's look at it another way, Mr. Speaker. Let's look at it another way, Mr. Speaker. Why don't we have a sign outside all of these limited attendance centres that said, please note, the government accepts no responsibility. This person has not been vetted for child abuse. This person does not necessarily have a first aid certificate. This person may leave children unattended while they go to the bathroom. This person does not necessarily have any qualifications or any knowledge about children and child care. Let's have a sign outside every limited attendance centre that says that this government will accept no responsibility. Because that's effectively what this piece of legislation does. It is an appalling piece of legislation that goes backwards. And it's got nothing to do, Louise Upston, it's got nothing to do with over-regulation. That's complete nonsense. It's got nothing to do with over-regulation. What it's got everything to do is the safety of young children in this country. In a country that has got some of the highest child abuse in the world, we are enabling child abusers to go into these sort of centres and be able to wreak havoc. I don't believe that this person actually, that Louise Upston actually wants that to happen, but that's the intention of this bill. That's the intention. That's what this minister is going to allow to have happen in here. And when the first piece of child abuse happens, the minister will say, what is the minister going to say? It'll be very interesting to see what the minister's going to say. It's not my fault. It's not my fault. It's the parents' fault. They knew that there was nobody in here that knew how to look after their children. They knew that there was nobody here that was trained in children, in child caring and child rearing and looking after children. The parents should have known that there was nobody here that knew anything about first aid. That's what's going to happen, Mr. Speaker, with this piece of legislation. We are opening the doors, as Mr. Mallard says, for child abusers and rapists to be in places like this and to abuse our children. I just don't think it's good enough. It's kind of ironic, Mr. Speaker, it's kind of ironic that we have brought in national standards uselessly, I would argue, uselessly. I got my child's report came home the other day under the new national standards reporting facilities. It's incomprehensible. I had no idea what it says compared to what it said a year ago. Absolutely no idea. We're regulating that. We're bullying schools to bring that in, but we're leaving the most important thing, Mr. Speaker, the most important thing was the safety of our children. We're leaving that completely out. It's absolutely appalling.
Order.
Absolutely appalling.
Time
And this government,